like I was saying, if you put too much water on the silicone, then it's gonna take forever to set. So this material cures with the surrounding air, so keep that in mind. If you use too much water, then the water can get sealed into the mold itself, and it's gonna take a really long time to cure, and it's gonna be unnecessary, and you will not be happy with the situation, I promise. Now also keep in mind, this is a material that does not exactly smell pleasant. It's very vinegary. So I would recommend, if you need to get in close to kind of see a little bit of what's going on, like check the thickness of the first layer, do a quick breath, look over for a few seconds and like, oh, spot is a little bit thicker. I should move some over here. Then do that, then come back. This is not a material that will kill you. It just smells unpleasant. So there's that. Tap. All right, so I'm gonna make sure that I've covered the entirety of my board. Sorry, not entirety of my board, entirety of my object. Goodness, what is language? What are words? Again, another way that you can double check like the thickness of your mold is, like I said, doing the bird's eye view, checking down so you can see the sides, but also look at the connection point to where the board meets your object. So that way you can kind of tell like, yeah, these are some areas that are doing good, that are where I need them to be, just as some reference. All right, so this is what the first layer of your object is going to look like. So very thin. You can still see the object. Just of course it's a tad bit lumpy because you just put silicone on it, but it's still you can still tell what it is. Now we're going to move this to the side, and I have prepared more silicone molds because, so these are all the same object, these are just in different, they're just different layers. So again, for silicone molds, like almost every other mold in the world, we work in 3 layers. So that was the first layer. This is, thank you. This one is the first layer. Okay. Sorry, this is the first layer right here. Second layer, third layer. Now, there's some little stringy bits. So this isn't the most even, but it's still a pretty good job. So you can look at the base and kind of tell about how thick it is around. You can also look at the top of this, the whole outside, and comparatively, this is not super huge as compared to the first layer, but it's just a little bit bigger. So about here, now we're finally at about a 1/4 of an inch. This is, after putting on the second layer, you're about a 1/4 of an inch thick. So something to note, whenever you're building up layers, like from 1, 2, 3, you always want to make sure that your first layer is completely set. Granted, you're not going to be making this first layer thick at all because it's a detail layer. If you make it, it's like extremely thick. If you make it a 1/4 of an inch thick initially, it's not going to set within a reasonable amount of time. The first layer should set in about 30 to 45 minutes. So with that being said, while you're in here, you can multitask, work on something else, come back to this after your first layer is done and it's set, you can put the second layer on. So after second layer, third layer. Again, whenever you put the second layer on this one, it should only take 30 to 45 minutes to set. If it takes longer, You made your layer too thick, which is fine. It's just gonna take a longer amount of time before you can put the last layer on. So last layer, we're looking at the bottom. I can kind of tell, I don't necessarily know what this object is if I just look at it like this. It is about 1/2 inch thick at most. So again, these molds do not need to be super thick in order to make a good wax. It's just about setting time, and it's just about using your time efficiently, really. So this is a really good process, a good cheap way to be able to make a rubber mold, to use it multiple times. Now, this is the same object as all these, like I said before. This one is done. Everything is set now, like I said, since I put petroleum jelly in this corner that I used, I can just peel it off, toss this guy in the trash can, and we're good. So I'm gonna set this guy to the side over here. I'm gonna move this out of the way. And I am ready to take my object out of my mold that is finished. So something that I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Sharpie and my box cutter. Now, we need to be able to get this object out of the mold. So we cut a zigzag pattern into it. So we create a lock and key system. So that way, whenever we go to pour wax, wax just doesn't pour right out. We also do not cut a straight line because at that point, the pressure from the wax, kind of think about parting the Red Sea or something, or yeah, so think of something like that. I don't know, some type of metaphor, whatever that means. But if there's too much pressure on a single line, like that's ultimately just one long pressure point. If you cut straight down, the wax is just gonna pour out. As compared to a lock and key system, there are multiple pressure points and there's more support. So that way it doesn't do that. I like to take my Sharpie and just draw the zigzag pattern because that way I can physically see where I'm going with my box cutter. So I'm gonna start my pattern at, just pick a side at the bottom. So I'm gonna draw a little zigzag. Now, I'm only gonna draw my pattern to about to the edge of the top of my mold. I'm not gonna go all the way up here. If I do that, then there's an opportunity for the wax to maybe come out at the bottom. Now, if your object calls for specific, like if we have to cut it that way, that's fine, but it's not ideal. So we can make anything work. This is just what I'm gonna start with. And then if I have to cut it a little bit more to get the object out, that's fine, we'll figure it out. So I'm gonna take my box cutter and I'm gonna follow this pattern. Now, I am going to cut away from myself because if your hand slips, you don't wanna have a blade going towards you because, ow, you might stab yourself. So, I'm going to cut away from myself. I'm going to make sure that I can feel my object. So whenever I feel my blade hit my object, it is, it's good. So that little part, so right here it's separating. You can see that it's pulling apart. Also keep in mind these objects, I should have started off with this, so I apologize. With these objects that you're making a silicone mold of, they're going to get dirty. You're gonna cover them in mold release, probably get a little Vaseline on them, probably have scratches from the box cutter. So do not bring your grandma's urn, or do not bring the urn of your deceased animal because it will be covered in a bunch of stuff. Oh, another thing to keep in mind is another object I would not recommend bringing is if you have something like epoxy, like a 5-minute set epoxy in a tube, the tube aspect will look really cool and wax. However, you may accidentally cut through the lining of the epoxy whenever you have made your mold. And if it takes you a long time to cut your silicone mold to try to get the object out, the epoxy is going to seep everywhere and it will set in your silicone mold, and then your silicone mold will be ruined. So you're gonna be trying to get a bunch of sticky stuff out of your silicone mold, and it's going to set. And your silicone mold, like I said, will be no good, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, I'm gonna be careful. I'm gonna check and make sure that this is cut correctly. So there's a little point here that I missed. So I'm gonna go back. Okay, that one's good. Yay. So I feel like I need to cut my mold a little bit more just so I can get my object out. So tiny little cut towards the top of the edge, just about right here, so not too far off. Yay. All right, so now, little lock and key system. Now I can come in and gently try to wiggle out my object. What I like to do is go around the edge and kind of break the initial seal. That is around, yeah, that's around that first layer. Now, whenever you're first taking your object out, be very careful, just in case your, like, I know we use mold release, but just in case your object is sticking a little bit, we don't want to tear the silicone mold. So sometimes you just kind of have to put your finger in there and kind of work your way around it to gently separate the silicone from your object. Also, if you have something that's kind of like highly textured like this is, it might stick a little bit more. But I figured that this would be a good demo to do this on just for that reason. So you can kind of, just in case you encounter any difficulties, again, I'll be there to help you. That's why I'm here. But we all struggle, so it's okay. So. Can also do a little twist in action, and it's starting to come undone, which is good. Okay, cool. All right, and now we have the void from our object. I can feel that the texture is still there, which is really exciting. So this texture that was from the bandage is there. Now, since this is just a bandage, it really doesn't matter if it gets ruined. It's not a big issue. But now, I'm excited and I have my object. My mold came off pretty cleanly, so there really isn't any residue besides a little bit of wax. So I'm just gonna take a paper towel and get some of that out. There's just a couple wax dots from where I kind of had to fill in the void. Get it out. Yay. And now, these are where the cool rubber bands come in. I can't just pour wax into a mold like this because you see how, like, the lock and key system is still there, but we need to be the wax will just pour out like this. So